The band as a whole is almost like a marriage for all the members involved. Not only do you have to tour with the same group of people all the time, but you have to make major decisions when it comes to money, creative contributions, and songwriting credits. Add that to the inflated egos getting in the way, and it becomes a recipe for disaster. While all the bands on this list went on to greater things in the rock world, they had to sever ties with tremendous musicians to get to where they are today. It's never an easy decision, but it has to be made regardless. I am Kirsten from WhatCulture, and these are 10 hard rock bands that fired members. Number 10, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Dave Navarro. Fans were absolutely gutted when master guitarist John Frusciante announced his departure from Red Hot Chili Peppers. Frusciante's unique melodic style of playing helped take the band to unforeseen heights. However, there was initially no need to worry, as Dave Navarro from alt-rock pioneers Jane's Addiction stepped in to fill his shoes. While the Peppers' only release with Navarro, One Hot Minute, was still incredibly well done, the band's chemistry just didn't seem to flow in the natural way it did with Frusciante. As opposed to laying down a simple foundation of funk and rock, Navarro was more on the rock-centric side, whose talents didn't necessarily lend themselves to funkier material. In addition to legitimate creative differences, Navarro was getting strung out on heroin during the band's rehearsals, where frontman Anthony Kiedis was already fighting his narcotic demons. This led to rehearsals being brought to a staggering halt as the band struggled to maintain a coherent groove. The final straw came when Navarro showed up so strung out at one session that he fell over onto his equipment. Not long afterwards, the Peppers made up with Frusciante and released the slamming Californication. But one can only wonder what a sequel with Navarro might have sounded like. Number 9, Rush fired John RUTSEY. When Rush were cutting their debut record, they were far removed from the prog rock giants we know today. The material of their early days was very much a blues-inspired hard rock sound that followed in the footsteps of bands like Led Zeppelin and Bad Company. As the band blossomed, guitarist Alex Lifeson and bassist Geddy Lee became interested in more complex material like Genesis and Yes, which didn't sit well with the original drummer John RUTSEY. Once the band took to the road, RUTSEY started to become more out of step due to health concerns. Having been diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, RUTSEY's habits of living the rock and roll lifestyle were having a drastic effect on his well-being. It was finally the band's road manager who insisted that RUTSEY be replaced, or he would not be able to survive another tour. After breaking the news to John, the drummer was understanding of the situation, but no less heartbroken. With a demand for someone else behind the skins, the band finally landed with Neil Peart, whose drumming style was not only incredibly strong, but also meshed with the duo perfectly. It may have been a sad parting for RUTSEY, but what Rush went on to become in the hard rock scene is still unmatched. Number 8, Jason Everman from NIRVANA and SOUNDGARDEN. In the grand chain of events that unfolded in Seattle circa 1990, Jason Everman really got a raw deal after being in 2 of the biggest bands of the grunge scene. While being a fixture on the scene in the late 80s, Everman was asked to join Nirvana to fill out Kurt Cobain's guitar sound. Everman even went so far as to put up the $606 to record the band's debut Bleach, but Cobain became much more dissatisfied with his style and abruptly cancelled the band's subsequent club tour with Everman. After that fiasco, Everman seemed to have landed on his feet when local titans SOUNDGARDEN found themselves without a bassist after Hiro Yamamoto quit after the band's Louder Than Love record. Unfortunately, Everman only had the opportunity to play on a cover of the Beatles' Come Together before he was quickly dismissed following the tour. Everman then left the music industry for a while and went on to become a decorated soldier, serving tours in Iraq and Afghanistan as an army ranger. Number 7, Pantera fired Terry Glaze. The first thing people typically think of when Pantera is brought up in conversation is the undeniable riffs and the absolute brutality that the band brought to the metal scene. Each record of the band's glory years helped push metal forward in the era of the alt-rock explosion. Their work in the 90s was so unprecedented that people tend to forget that the band started off as a glam metal act. With the band's first few releases, the talent was certainly there, but the tonal shift between their later material is glaring in retrospect. One of the greatest influences of the band's sound at the time time was the high-searing timbre of the vocalist Terry GLAZE. However, as the Abbott brothers were inspired by heavier acts like Slayer and Metallica, the more GLAZE's vocals didn't suit the band's style. After 3 records, the band parted ways with GLAZE and introduced the rip-roaring growl of Phil Anselmo, whose feral shouts fit in much better with the groove of the band. The band's debut with Anselmo on power metal showed the heavier direction that the band would come to cultivate further down the road. Though GLAZE couldn't join in on the fun, Pantera's rise to the upper echelons of metal was unstoppable once Anselmo joined their ranks. Number 6. Megadeth fired Chris Poland and Gar Samuelson. When forming Megadeth, Dave Mustaine wanted to create a harsh metallic assault that would stomp out any metal band in its wake. With his partner in crime Dave Ellefson at his side, Mustaine hired drummer Gar Samuelson and Chris Poland from the jazz fusion scene. The pairing seemed perplexing at first, but the complicated riffage of Poland not only lived up to Mustaine's shredding standards, but his chemistry with Samuelson's drums riffs led to a musical team that could play circles around any other metal band. While the band was riding high, nothing could stop their habits of self-destruction, with Samuelson and Poland strung out on drugs. Though the band were all hiding their demons, both Poland and Samuelson took it one step further by pawning their gear to score drugs. Dave Ellefson then started to notice different guitars and pedals missing from the practice space, and then having to retrieve his instruments from the pawn shop. With the band not seeing eye to eye on the finances of their output, Mustaine decided to fire both Samuelson and Poland so that the band could still survive as a unit. Even if Megadeth is still as strong as ever today, the ever-shifting lineup of lead guitar and drums springs back to this one internal fiasco. Number 5. The Rolling Stones fired Brian Jones. In the British invasion explosion of the early 60s, the Rolling Stones were the authentic blend of blues and rock that set the standard for every other rock band to follow. The main attraction seemed to be on the team of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, but the early incarnation of the band was very much guitarist Brian Jones's baby. Jones had originally named the band, selected the cover material, and even acted as de facto manager for the band in the early days. However, he also partied harder than his bandmates, which began to have an effect on the band's creative output. Much of Jones's dependence on narcotics came from his unhappiness of not being able to give as much as he could to the music. Instead of steering the ship, album sessions would soon be dictated by Jagger and Richards, leaving Jones only present to play whatever instrument was needed for the track. By the time the band released Beggar's Banquet, Jones was too strung out to contribute in any capacity. After one too many failed sessions, the Stones finally let Jones go, with Jones eventually dying in his swimming pool a few months later. In one fell swoop, any of the innocence that the Stones had left was gone forever. Number 4. Black Sabbath fired Ozzy Osbourne. No one had heard anything like Black Sabbath's music when the band unleashed their debut in 1970. This was the sound of what would become heavy metal, with dark guitar sounds and the booming stomp of the rhythm section. Though the instrumentation was stellar, Ozzy Osbourne was the real draw to the band, with his madman persona and erratic behaviour on stage. Even though the band continued to go from strength to strength on each record, Osbourne's narcotic habits became less of a gimmick and more of a hindrance to the band's work. It got so dire while on tour that Osbourne was often left to the side of the stage, while guitarist Tony Iommi took centre stage to bring the riffs. By the end of the 70s, it was clear that the band had done all they could to do with Osbourne as a creative team. After 1978's Never Say Die, the band gave Osbourne the boot and hired powerhouse Ronnie James Dio to fill his shoes. With Osbourne left to his own devices, he picked himself up to create a stellar solo career. While Ozzy reunited with Sabbath on multiple occasions, the initial departure was anything but pleasant. Number 3. Queens of the Stone Age fired Nick Oliveri. There was always an initial idea of Queens of the Stone Age being an ever-changing lineup of musicians with Josh Homme at the helm. However, the band had settled into somewhat of a consistent lineup, with Mark Lanegan and Nick Oliveri as primary contributors from the band's debut, Songs for the Deaf. However, things started getting ugly as the tour cycle went on. After various shows, Oliveri's behaviour became much more aggressive among his bandmates, and rumours started circulating that he had been physically abusive to his girlfriend. One particular occasion at Soundcheck in 2003 led to him lashing out at Homme when he brought up his suspicions of abuse. With tensions mounting, Oliveri was quickly fired as the band finished the tour and went into the recording of their next album, Lullabies to Paralyze. Oliveri was vocal about his bitterness at first, but has since made his peace with his dismissal in recent years. After a while away, Oliveri has expressed a desire to return to Queens, but nothing nothing has been announced outside of a few contributions to the album, like Clockwork. The band may be a different animal than it was in the 2000s, but it's still thriving despite losing the visceral energy of Oliveri. Number 2. Def Leppard fired Pete Willis. Def Leppard's rise to fame was one of the most rapid success stories of the 80s. With some of the members still in their early 20s, the band quickly gained traction with their sophomore smash High and Dry, with hits like Bringin' On the Heartbreak. As they returned to the studio, the band was willing to do whatever it takes to make the best hard rock record they had ever heard. The resulting album, Pyromania, was a phenomenal success, but it cost them one of their guitarists. Even though the entire band had indulged themselves in alcohol abuse, guitarist Pete Willis found himself unable to keep up with his bandmates. During the recording of the album, Willis would sometimes come into the session half drunk from the night before and turning in lackluster guitar performances. After giving Willis a few ultimatums, the band realised that they just needed to cut him loose altogether. Midway through recording, Willis was replaced by guitar Phil Collen, whose more fluid guitar playing fit right in next to guitarist Steve Clark's more raucous soloing. Though Willis is present on Pyromania in the rhythm tracks, his time in the hard rock spotlight had been quickly snuffed out. Number 1. Metallica fired Dave Mustaine. Metallica's expulsion of Dave Mustaine is something that is still talked about in metal circles. The acrimonious split between both parties left years of bad blood and tons of great music from each other's creative ventures. The band was en route to New York from San Francisco to record their first album when the band started to notice Mustaine's erratic behaviour becoming more intolerable by the day. By the time the band had got to the East Coast, they had made up their mind about their next course of action. After waking Dave up early in the morning, the band quickly sent him packing, picking up Exodus guitar Kirk Hammett and leaving Mustaine with a bus ticket back to California. On the ride back, Mustaine had the drive to put together the band that may just have the ability to surpass the glory of Metallica. Quickly getting to work with bassist Dave Ellefson, Megadeth was born with Mustaine at the helm as the venomous heavy metal frontman. It may not have been a pleasant road for either band, but Metallica and Megadeth turned all their aggression into some of the best metal music the genre has to offer. And that's our list. Let us know your thoughts in the comment below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. But for now, I've been Kirsten from WhatCulture, and I'll see you in the next one.